I think last weekend against Rice, there were really two major concerns that popped up. One of which I think might be a little bit overblown, given the situation that Texas is in this week along the offensive line. I think the interior offensive line concerns are very valid when you look at film last week. But Texas unfortunately had some injuries that cropped up. One of those injuries was to sophomore right guard DJ Campbell. He has not been taking the first team reps in practice this week. That has been sophomore right guard Cole Hudson, who was the starter for most of last season, including the starting right guard against Alabama. So I think you're going to be looking at a different personnel grouping along the offensive line. Still, though, you have to take into account that, they're playing on the road. This is going to be an insane atmosphere at Bryant-Denny Stadium on Saturday night. And the communication was still spotty. It wasn't just the offensive line. Wide receivers had issues blocking last weekend. So I think interior offensive line concerns are valid, but it's going to be a different group. I think it's going to be a better effort along the interior this weekend. The second concern I really had was the deep ball for Quinn Ewers. I think it's been a little bit overblown this week because, Quinn had the same issue last year, and there were other issues at work that contributed to him going over 6 on deep balls last week. It's still a little unacceptable that he's 1 of 14 on deep balls going back to the Alamo Bowl last season with 2 drops from Xavier Worthy in the Alamo Bowl last year. But, there were some missed pass interferences. I think there was one ball that the wide receiver didn't adjust quite right to, but the deep ball, it's got to be a factor. It's just so important to making Sark's offense work at a high level. And so I don't know if anything's really going to change there. Quinn Ewers has a lot of stuff to fix mechanically, and just in terms of his timing and anticipation in the pocket. But all other phases of the game for Ewers were pretty solid against Rice last weekend.
Zach, I'll tee you up, and then this may work a little bit better. If you guys can certainly hit each other up with what your questions are concerning each unit here on the other side. Of course, everyone wants to talk about Jalen Milroe.
Of course.
Without any improvement, I and others were touting this as the worst quarterback situation in Alabama since Nick Saban arrived, basically, because you had Jalen Milroe, who showed us a game and a half of work.
And he wasn't very good.
Texas A&M, not very good. Elite athlete, but not a quarterback.
Course.
And then a lot of people like Greg McElroy said Ty Simpson's going to win this job because he's the most polished passer. And then, of course, you had Tyler Buckner coming in from Notre Dame, which he's a good backup quarterback, but at a place like Alabama should be a backup quarterback. So Jalen Milroe played much better than a lot of people anticipated on Saturday. Was your impression like this is a guy that's worked on his craft for an entire offseason?
My impression was, yes, even throwing the ball mechanically, he looks so much better. And they didn't do a lot of design runs. They had the one big run that was really a broken play. But also, a major thing was very vanilla. New offensive coordinator, new quarterback. They didn't show a whole lot, both in the run game and the pass game. So while Jalen was very impressive, that touchdown he had to Isaiah Bond was a beautiful throw. There was 3 Middle Tennessee defenders rushing. He had all the time in the world. So it's hard to – you don't want to overstate a performance against Middle Tennessee. And we'll see how Middle Tennessee – I think they play like Mizzou this week. So we'll see how that team compares to against Middle Tennessee and Alabama. But, no, very impressive because, nobody knew. I thought Ty Simpson was going to be the starter. They bring in Tommy Reese, and nobody really knows what it's going to look like. And after week 1, nothing but positive results now. And I think similar to Texas, I watched a bit of that Rice game, very vanilla. A lot of levels, concepts, a lot of just halfback dives. Nothing, you don't want to put anything on tape against an overmatched opponent in week 1. Like when you got a game like this coming up and Sark knows Saban and Saban knows Sark. So, Andrew, what did you think? Because to me it seemed like I only watched the first half, but Texas seemed really vanilla in the play calling.
Yeah, I would say outside of a couple of plays, I thought that there was a little there was a nice motion screen to on an RPO play to Jonathan Brooks. ended up going for like a 30, 35-yard touchdown that I thought was a little bit of a creative play call from Sark, but it's also one that we saw in multiple games last season. Outside of that, there wasn't much crazy motion. There wasn't a ton of different pre-snap looks than what you would get out of Sark's base offense. The defense, I think you could say a lot of the same. Texas was playing a lot of their kind of base 2-4-5 or, more of a 4-down lineman look, but still more that 2-4-5 look with 2 edge rushers. Not many stunts, twists, delayed blitzes. I also think Sark's rhetoric after the game was very telling of how he looked at the Rice game. I've never really heard a coach mention after the game. He said something akin to, a lot of fans were expecting this to go one way and it went another. And that he's mentioned multiple times this week that Rice threw different blitz looks at them. It was a lot of delayed pressure, some ghost pressure, ghost fronts as well. And so I think it was confusing the interior offensive line, causing some of that miscommunication in the first half. But a lot of the way Sark was talking about that made me think, wow, he really didn't prepare that much at all for Rice. Or at least not to the degree that you would expect a head coach to coming into a season. It was really weird comments.
I didn't see those comments. And of course, now you're playing Alabama, who's going to do a lot more different things. The main concern for Alabama is that their free safety and their star are day to day. They're able to practice, and that's being Jalen Key and Malachi Moore. So they're practicing, but Nick's made comments they don't know if they're going to be available for game. And you mentioned earlier Quinn Ewers' deep ball. It's going to have to be on point this game. Alabama, very good tackling in the first game for Kevin Steele. That Quinn Ewers' deep ball is going to have to be on point, and he has the weapons to do it, and he has wide receivers that can definitely win one-on-ones. Just what's it going to look like? What are your expectations for Quinn Ewers? Because he did look so good before he got hurt against Alabama last year, but this is a little bit different on Alabama team. They switched coordinators. What are your expectations for Quinn in approaching in Tuscaloosa?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot on Quinn's shoulders in this game. I think goes without saying if Texas couldn't run the ball very well with Bijan Robinson and Rashawn Johnson against Alabama's defensive front last year, that you can't count on the outside zone run game to be there this year. Texas was having issues running it against Rice. Alabama's a completely different level. So I think you're going to be looking at a lot of RPOs for Quinn Ewers, a lot of short and intermediate stuff. The horizontal passing game is going to carry a lot of the weight that the running game would otherwise. You mentioned there's a lot of skill weapons that Sark has in this offense. And I think he's going to have Ewers getting the ball to them, different motion looks. I think there's going to be some different, probably 11 and 12 personnel looks that Texas gets on the field just to try to throw in some different layered concepts at Alabama. Bama, that interior defensive line, Jaheim Otis, Dallas Turner obviously is going to be looming large for Quinn Ewers in this game. But this Alabama defensive front's not going to be super forgiving, and Texas is going to want to get the ball out of Ewers' hands very, very fast. I honestly don't know how much of a factor the deep passing game is going to be. I mentioned he's got to connect probably on one or two, but I don't think you can count on that to be a regular thing.
It feels like one of those things where if he can hit one in the first quarter and soften up the Bama defense, and they can't play press coverage, they can't jam the receivers at the line, that'll open up, Worthy on a crossing route that maybe should only go for 6 yards, but it now goes for 15 because he's such a good athlete and he can make plays like that. So he's definitely going to have to hit one or two, and that could make a world of difference for the Texas offense against, as always, a super talented Bama defense.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing a good amount of film study this week on Alabama and just kind of revisiting some schematics for Nick Saban's defense, that famous cover 7 that he likes to roll with. And I think that type of mod coverage scheme, it was something that gave Ewers some issues in other games last season. I know he looked really good against Bama before he went down with injury, but that coming into the season was something I was a little concerned about, was how was he going to read and break down these more complicated coverage schemes that can throw some different looks at you. But he went through his progressions a lot more naturally. the Rice game and the short and intermediate game, he never looked that composed, that consistent, and that accurate in any game last season. Even OU, I guess Bama aside, because he only played a quarter or more then.
And well, he did look against Bama. We do have to remember Sark is just a brilliant offensive guy. Those were all scripted plays. So,
yeah,
we'll see how he does as we get into like a second or third and fourth quarter.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Sark with the with play calling and his offensive scheming, because I do think he's going to have some plays drawn up for Quinn Ewers just to scheme playmakers open, get some easier looks, take some of the pressure off Quinn, but he can't do that all game long. And so, Texas is going to have to start getting in a rhythm, at least to the degree where, Alabama's not always loading the box, or that, Alabama's defense can be kept on their heels to some degree, because, again, I don't think Ewers is going to be able to do it all by himself this game, and the ground game's not going to be able to shoulder the load either. It's going to be a difficult matchup on Saturday for Ewers, there's no doubt, and he's going to have to process a lot. Yeah.
Because the quarterbacks we've seen have success against Alabama, and I'm mostly thinking of Hendon Hooker last year. What Tennessee was able to do running the ball then opened up the deep passing game, and then vice versa. Then the deep passing opened up the intermediate, and Josh Heupel goes bombs away no matter what. So it'll be interesting what Sark schemes up, if maybe there is a play on the first series where maybe they run for 4 yards, it's 2nd and 6, and they dial one up for Worthy down the sideline. See if they can make a play, something. I'm actually really excited to see Sark call this game, because last year, once Ewers went down, it was a close game throughout, but it was just a very ugly game offensively on both sides.
It was, and I mean, I think you have to attribute to that. For one, Hudson Card still had this high ankle sprain, and so that's incredibly difficult to play on. But also, you saw once Hudson Card got settled in with the Texas offense, Sark pretty much completely changed the way he was calling games against West Virginia. He pretty much switched like a spread offense to best fit Card's skill set. But I think the difference between, if we're looking at like the Tennessee-Alabama game last year, I think the big difference between that game and how Alabama's going to be preparing for this game, at that point, I know it was still kind of middle of the season, early SEC play when that game took place. But, I think Alabama had a certain respect for what Hendon Hooker could do on the deep ball at that point. Also, Tennessee had a better interior run blocking at that point last season than Texas does early this season. So those two differences, I think, are going to kind of cause Texas to have to set the tone through the air, at least through, get maybe a big pickup on a screen player, maybe something like a short slant or post route, get your guys out in space, have them pick up some yards after the catch.
The run game's interesting, too, because all of last year, Alabama, especially really under Bill O'Brien the last 2 years, the run game just wasn't what you expect from an Alabama run game, where it feels like every play they're getting 6 yards, 7 yards. Oh, they broke one out. Here's a 23-yard gain. Now here's another 5-yard gain. And it just wears you, even when they started to go more spread and tempo with Najee Harris. And last week, it's sort of similar to you guys versus Rice. It was a very vanilla run game, so it's not. And Middle Tennessee, at least last year, did a decent job of stopping the run. So I don't want to make any conclusions, but Chase McClellan had the 120-yard run. Jalen Milroe had a long run on a broken play. And other than that, just not what you would expect from Alabama. So both run games, it'll be interesting to see how much last week was just, we're not putting anything on tape before we play our big game, and how much what they have in store for each other come Saturday.
Yeah, and actually that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, was about the Alabama ground game. So last season, Alabama had trouble getting much going on the ground. You had that long run from Jace McClellan, but I think that long run was largely due to a misread from Texas's middle linebacker, Jalen Ford. Since that time, Jalen Ford has become one of the best linebackers, if not in the Big 12, one of the best defenders in the Big 12. I think one of the best linebackers in the entire country. I don't think you can count on him to be missing those reads again this year. I think Texas's interior defensive line is also even more stout. than it was last season. And it was already probably the best interior defensive line in the Big 12 last year. I think that Alabama, Jalen Milroe, he can give Texas some issues with his legs. I have no doubt about that. I think Milroe is going to come in with a chip on his shoulder too. He's a former Texas committee's guy that was recruited by Sark. And I'd be remiss to say I think he fully knows the reason why he's at Alabama, or at least initially why he flipped, was because Quinn Ewers committed to Texas. This was a long time ago. A lot has happened since then.
That's the thing not a lot of people are talking about, and that's a good point to bring up.
And I mean, I know that Milroe is playing at home, and that like I said, there's been a lot that's happened since then. A lot of time has passed, but that stuff lives in a quarterback's, any player's head for that matter, especially when that's happening during your recruitment. I think for Texas, dual threat quarterbacks were a big issue last year at times. Texas Tech beat Texas largely because they had a dual threat quarterback in Donovan Smith that kind of keep you on your toes, get some of those key third, occasionally fourth down pickups, 5, 6, 7 yards. The dual threat element of Jalen Milroe's game is going to worry me. This is a question that I wanted to throw back at you was, Jalen Milroe had an impressive week 1, but we just haven't seen a ton from him on film because he really had the Texas A&M game last year, and
he wasn't really any. And it was a very limited playbook against Texas A&M.
Right. And so, I was doing some digging this week, just looking through different, personnel formations, different defenses he's faced, things like that. And it's hard to say because I'm sure he's gotten better year over year. He definitely looked better against Middle Tennessee than he did last year. I saw when he was forced out of the pocket due to pressure that it really fazed him quite a bit. I saw he against pressure and moving outside the pocket, he was something like 43% passing, had I think 1 touchdown, maybe no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Much better when he had maybe even if he is coming under pressure, but much better throwing in the pocket. That kind of surprised me a little bit. Also saw that, he had about 50 scramble yards when he was coming under pressure and had to evade the pocket. I guess the way I need to ask this is if a team is able to get some pressure up the middle, with that interior pass rush, get Milroe going outside, and you have someone spying him, maybe akin to what like LSU does with Harold Perkins. Is that something you could see impacting Jalen Milroe, or do you think he'll just find a way around it and scramble?
No, when you have as limited tape as you have on Jalen Milroe, something like that, something as simple as what happens when he gets pressured, you're going to be concerned about it. You're going to wonder, how's he going to react to this? Yes, he played Texas A&M. By that point of the season, we knew Texas A&M wasn't very good. Now you're playing Texas, a top 12 team. I think they're much better than that. They're super talented. Again, playing the kid who was the reason you decommitted from Texas. How's he going to react to just pressure from the outside and then pressure from a really good Texas defense? You look at the recruiting that Texas has done, especially under Sark, that's an SEC talented defense. That's a really, really good defense. So it's hard to pinpoint what to expect from him when he has to roll out left, when he has to roll out right, and he can't just scramble for 8 yards, maybe make a guy miss and goes for 12 yards. It's hard to pinpoint what to expect. That's why this game's really exciting, because if Milroe has a big game, especially after how he looked against Middle Tennessee, oh my goodness, Alabama has another one. Like, are you kidding me? We go from Tua to Bryce to now Milroe. If he struggles a bit, then a little air comes out of the balloon. How does that impact the rest of the season if Bama wins or loses? Because the winner or loser of this game, their season's not over. Unlike like LSU, I think the other night, where it's like, oh, they played so bad, I think their season's over in the second half. The loser of this game will still have plenty of opportunity to get themselves back into the conversation. And part of that's going to be, how does Milroe look facing pressure from a super talented Texas defense? And some of it's going to be on the receivers. Last year, the Alabama receivers were not good. They just weren't good. Jermaine Burton was super disappointing all season long. They expected a kid from Louisville to be kind of their deep threat, and he just was never healthy and couldn't play.
Oh yeah, didn't he end up back in the portal? I think it was Tyler Harrell.
Yeah,
Tyler
Tyler Harrell.
Harrell.
Thank you. I
Back
could not
in
think of his
Miami.
name. Yeah, but he went
Or going to Miami. Yeah.
So now it's going to be, and the receivers were better, especially like Isaiah Bond against Middle Tennessee. But again, it is Middle Tennessee. Middle Tennessee was kind of forcing you to make deep shot plays. I was listening to somebody else talk about this, and I wish I remembered who. But Middle Tennessee's whole strategy when they play teams like Alabama or other SEC teams is we'll give them the deep shot, and if they hit it, like they should, we're Middle Tennessee. But if they don't, we can kind of hang around and stay in the game and see what happens as we move forward. So we'll see what we see. We'll see what we get from Milroe this week. I'm super excited to watch it because, as everyone should be, a new offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees, kind of an offensive coordinator hire that was not made fun of, but a little like, that's your guy? That's the guy you're going with, Tommy Rees? And then you bring in Tyler Buchner, and then Saban in the first depth chart puts Orr on 4 quarterbacks, not just 3. So we'll see what Milroe does this week. Does he show out and have a big game against a really good Texas defense, or do some of those concerns we had preseason after the film we saw last year come more into focus, and we start to really wonder, okay, what does Alabama look like against the rest of the SEC West? How do they compare against Georgia and some of these other teams moving forward?
Yeah, to follow up on your point about the wide receivers, that was another thing I wanted to ask. I hear a lot of talk about Jalen Milroe this week, and rightly so. I mean, he's going to be the starting quarterback, first-year starter, or he's the starting quarterback, first-year starter. But, you guys had Bryce Young last year, maybe the best quarterback in the last 2 decades at Alabama. Maybe that's 2. I don't know. That's probably up for conjecture. But, Bryce Young played a really good game last year, and Alabama puts up 20 points. I think a lot of that's due to the kind of ineptitude of the Alabama receivers. There were a lot of drop balls, a lot of catchable balls that probably should have been brought in at least at a 50% rate that just weren't. You mentioned Isaiah Bond. Is there anyone else that, Texas fans or just people in general should be looking for that, could make an impact on this game?
Jermaine Burton, he looked a lot crisper. I know people know the name Jermaine Burton. He was on the first Georgia national championship team. He's the guy that's going to have to step up and be a wide receiver 1 or a 2. I don't think they have on this team. And Bama's been a factory for wide receivers now for a decade. More. They had Julio, and then we go into Amari, and then Calvin Ridley, and then of course 2018, 2019, every wide receiver was a first-round pick. They don't have that, so they're going to have to be able to spread the ball around. No one's going to be a number 1, but they all need to be really good number 2s. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and another thing is, Jahmyr Gibbs is gone, and he was correct me if I'm wrong, I think he was probably the best target you guys also had in the passing game last year.
He was.
Yeah, and Jahmyr Gibbs being gone is a pretty big relief for a lot of Texas fans because, man, he was good. He was a lot of fun to watch.
You mentioned the McClellan runner. I wanted to pull up a box score from last year. Last year against Texas, 9 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown.
Yeah.
He was excellent.
So ultimately, if this comes down to a low-scoring game, which I do think it will, my personal opinion is I think it'll be a lower-scoring game. I think my initial, it's changed, but I think my initial pick on this was 24-21 Bama.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, the thing that I do think will change this game potentially is if either team's hitting, multiple deep shots. I think that can dramatically change the nature of this game, especially with the new clock rules, maybe a possession fewer for each team in this game. Is there anything from Bama's defense, though, that would worry you a little bit beyond the secondary injuries? I had a hard time finding much, any flaws on that defense.
There's not really any flaws. They're young in spots, but that's just to be expected in college football. You're going to be young in certain spots all over the field. Besides the injuries, there's nothing I would pinpoint and be like, well, you can really attack this. You can really attack the interior of their D line. No, you really can't. You could really attack their linebackers. Not really. It's the injuries. If you're missing your free safety and your star, that's going to play a role. And when you have an offensive play caller like Sark, you're not playing insert bad offense here. They're going to find ways to exploit that. And while your second guy may be super talented, it's Alabama. They're going to be fast. They're going to be have plenty of athletic ability. Do they have it up here to make a play when what's coming at them if they haven't had the reps to, especially playing a team like Texas?
Yeah. Okay. I remember hearing earlier this week that it was more likely that Jalen Key was going to give it a go this weekend than Malachi Moore. Or that might have been the other way around. Is there any truth to one of those being more likely to go than the other?
Only thing I saw today was Saban said they're both practicing, and we'll see how they are as we get closer to game time.
Okay. Yeah, that's one thing that I was definitely wondering about. And then, I mean, as far as like the corner and wide receiver matchups go, like I have a hard time seeing Texas finding like too much room to run. But like, I think Texas, I mentioned there's going to be a lot in the horizontal passing game that they're going to try this weekend. Have you seen much from Alabama in the last year or so that would make you think that they're going to be like just completely buttoned up, or maybe have some issues like contesting space if you got some different like screen action working against you?
No, not any concerns, but again, Texas was able to really beat them Tennessee was able to just burn them on deep passes. Jalen Hyatt. Yeah. LSU.
It was more RPO
stuff. So, but I don't want to say no, there's no concern with it, because how many teams are running this style with the athletes that Texas has and the quarterback talent that Texas has in Ewers?
Yeah, I almost think it's going to be – I think it's more going to look like a hybrid game plan of what you saw between LSU and Tennessee. I think Texas is going to try to stretch the field some, but I have a good feeling that you're probably looking at least 10 or 12 RPO passes from Quinn Ewers on Saturday.
If you're Texas, you have to at least try a couple times. You don't have to be taking deep shots every series or every couple series, but you have to try a couple times to just at least try and soften up the pressure and in a game like this, especially, it's going to be one score. One big play like that could make all the difference, or a dropped punt, or just something goofy happening. So you have to at least try.
Yeah. I do think that Texas is going to try to test the Alabama linebackers. I don't think that Texas connected enough with JT Sanders last year. I know that there's a play in the end zone where there's a lot of contact. Sanders wasn't able to come down with it, but I never thought that Hudson Card and JT Sanders had the best chemistry, but I think Quinn Ewers and Sanders do. So I'll be interested to see how much Texas attacks, especially if Alabama doesn't have, a slot corner healthy, then at least the starting slot corner healthy, then I think that would be like one area that Texas might try to attack.
It'll be there. Their opportunity will be there to attack that part of the field.
Yeah. From like the perspective of Alabama's offense against Texas's defense, do you think that, like, I guess, where do you think that Alabama is going to try to exploit that like kind of high level question to me is something that I've been going back and forth on. I don't really know.
So, like I said, where they might try to exploit, again, like last year with the quarterback running back pass connection, see if there's something there again this year. I don't know if there will be. It's really hard to tell what Alabama is going to try and do at all offensively. Now, obviously, they're going to try and use Jalen Milroe's legs. He's an elite athlete. They're going to try and get him out in space, make defenders make decisions out on the perimeter. But as we talked about earlier, his numbers against pressure haven't been good at all. So with a new offensive coordinator, it's really hard to tell what they're going to try to do, especially off last week where they didn't do anything special. A lot of power, a lot of just – so I don't know how to properly answer that question, because it's one thing for Jermaine Burton to look so much better against Middle Tennessee, just getting off the ball. It's another thing to do it against Texas.
Then I guess from your perspective as a fan and someone that covers the team, would you feel more comfortable if they came out and kind of tried to set the tone more leaning on the pass or the run?
Run. If Alabama is going to be a national title team this year, they need to run the football. and they're going to need to go back. If Alabama's going to win a national title this year or even compete at that level and get to that point, it needs to be more like the 2016 team than, say, 2020.
That's fair.
It needs to be more power run game. And Milroe, gosh, this is 7 years ago, so you can look at things, but not watching like full games. Milroe, I think, might be a little bit more polished than Jalen Hurts at that point.
That bodes well for him down the road.
Yes, but does he have Jalen Hurts' work ethic and all that stuff that makes Jalen Hurts special? They're different.
I must say, Jalen Hurts also had a really nice deep ball, just watching him like throw it around in high school, and I didn't quite see that from Milroe. Like,
yeah, and they're different runners too.
Yeah,
they're not the same style of runner. So it's going to be more of that. It's got to be more of that 2016 offense, even like the 2014 offense with Blake Sims.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they don't have Amari Cooper because he would be nice to have on this team, or even a running back like Derrick Henry. So, but it's going to need more of that style of team. So I would love, especially after last week and the last 2 years, with the run game for Alabama, it has just not been. It hasn't been Alabama. I would like to see them come out first game and just punch Texas in the mouth, and see if you can. If you can run 4.5, 5 yards a carry, they're gonna be in a good spot. You're gonna be able to hit play action. You're gonna be able to get Joe Miller out on the perimeter. But if you again struggle, you're gonna see a game like last year where Bryce Young can do it all and he can look like a number 1 overall pick. But how many of these passes are going to get completed? How many of these passes are going to find their intended target? How many are going to be throwaways? So I would love to see him come out and run the ball effectively.
How much do you think? How much of a workload do you think they'll give to like a guy like I think he goes by J.M. Miller now, Jamarian Miller. He's a former Texas commit as well. I've heard that he's someone that might get a decent workload this weekend on the ground.
He might get it. It's very hard to answer questions about Texas or Alabama's offense just because we did not see it. Last week he only had 4 carries. McClellan had 10 carries. Roydell had 7. Justice Haynes. It seems like it's going to be more of a balanced look, and kind of what happens. It might be one of those things where in game it's like, okay, this kid's got the hot hand. Let's just feed him a little bit. It might be Jamarion Miller with a little bit of a revenge game, but there's some really good storylines off the field in this one too.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm really interested to see kind of the back and forth of how Saban and Sark both come out, try to set the tone versus what in-game adjustments kind of take place, because I'm assuming that the game plan coming in for both offenses is going to hit some speed bumps early. I don't think either offense.
Even in week 2, nothing's going to look smooth for either team right away.
Yeah, and I think Texas's defense, they looked so good in week 1, and they got a lot of returning starters, but so many of these young guys, especially in the secondary, they were able to rotate in week 1. I don't think Texas had a single guy that played more than 30 defensive snaps on Saturday, and they got good efforts pretty much all up and down the defense. Multiple turnovers forced. I will say, though, the one area that might concern me a little bit is if Alabama tries to run maybe some outside zone or off tackle at one of Texas's maybe the less experienced edge position. Texas has a starting edge, Ethan Burke, that he's lengthy, about 6'6", 6'7", 260 pounds. But he's a first-year starter, good pass rusher, had a sack and a half last week. I don't think he's quite there yet with the run defense, setting the edge. And so, that's probably the one area that potentially concerns me for Texas. But their other edge rusher, Barron Sorrell, is an established guy. He played really well against the run last season against Alabama. So I guess that's probably one of the things I'm trying to figure out myself just by watching film. But yeah, I mean, it's trying to figure out what Saban's going to do ahead of time is a unsolved mystery that's kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, it's one of those, and same thing with Bama's offense. You can rewatch the Middle Tennessee game, you can see what Milroe did against Texas A&M, and it's new coordinator. What are they going to try and do? As far as Sark and Saban, it doesn't feel as contentious as Saban Kiffin felt at times. And I know Kiffin likes to joke around at times with it, but you hear stories about Saban and Kiffin just butting heads, and you really don't hear any about that with Sark, which is really funny.
Yeah, Sark he's just such a laid back guy in private, and he's such like a, you know, a lot of times speaking to the media and stuff like that. He's very, you know, while he's straight up, he still, will give the answer that, won't be very polarizing or anything like that. He's not going to try to draw any unnecessary media attention. And so, whereas Kiffin is kind of the opposite in certain ways.
Yes. Oh, no. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, I think Sark's personality just fits in really well with Saban, and Kiffin for him is just so against the grain with so many different other coaches, but especially with Saban.
And you could argue Kiffin saved their run in 2014-15. I guess my last question for you is kind of a Texas as a whole question. Mm-hmm. How do you, as a Texas fan, how do you feel about Sarkisian? Just in general, like, how do you feel like he's doing? Obviously, he's been knocking out of the park, but
yeah,
how's he handling everything, especially after, I don't want to call last year disappointing because of how young you guys were, but
I think for Sark, it's you're going to have to see what happens at the end of this season to give it a complete grade. He really is that coach that needs 3 years to say. Whereas what I feel like when Tom Herman was on campus, by the end of the second year, you kind of knew a lot of the ups and downs that were going to come with his coaching tenure. Sark, it still feels like it's on that upward climb right now where, we got to see what happens throughout Big 12 play. I think if Texas gets blown out on Saturday, that's one thing. At that point, you can be like, okay, what's happening with Sark? They played really well last season, then this year they just can't match up. But, I think to the year-over-year progress, it was a successful season last year. I think that Texas would have had a 9-win season and would have finished in probably the top 15 if Bijan Robinson and Rashawn Johnson just played in the bowl game. I think just people kind of forget that Bijan didn't play against Washington, and that was still.
I forgot Rashawn didn't play.
Yeah, so they were missing their top 2 backs, and then their third string also had a hernia injury that he needed surgery the next month. So pretty much their top 3 backs were either out or pretty severely limited. So, I think having an 8-win regular season last year, they had some impressive wins on, Kansas State was the Big 12 champion. Beating them on the road was a really big win. I think Texas looked good in most games to finish out the season. For Sark, though, you gotta avoid some of those road letdowns that they had. Oklahoma State last year was probably the most frustrating loss that Texas had. It was just a very winnable game. TCU as well. Both games, he just didn't get the ball to your best player enough. He wasn't giving the ball to Bijan. I think against TCU, Bijan got the ball 12 times. I don't know what you're doing with one of the best running backs in the country, giving him.
Sounds like Urban Meyer against Michigan State when he gave Zeke the ball like 7 times.
Yep. Yeah.
Is that 2015? It had to be 15 because it was a year after the.
It was more like 13, but yeah, the point well taken.
So anyway, I think for Sark, there's been some coaching hiccups along the way. I think it's the in-game. It's kind of managing those situations in-game, avoiding those letdowns, especially when you have those double-digit leads. But he did a better job of managing that down the stretch last year. The program is definitely a lot more locked in right now. The culture turned around last year, and it seems like it continues to get better this season. Recruiting's been a success. We still have a long way to go with the 2024 class, and this is a really important class for the Longhorns. They've had some misses during the summer that were a little bit surprising, but I think they're still on the right track on the recruiting trail. Right now, I'm happy with where the program is at under Sark, but this year Texas has a wide open Big 12. I won't say wide open, but they have such an easy path to winning the Big 12 title game, it seems, especially after the first week in Big 12 play where you had Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU all losing, all teams that are on Texas's schedule this fall. And I think don't look as good as advertised.
It really does feel like if Texas isn't in the Big 12 title game, at least, what are we doing here?
Yeah, that's
because Kansas State's really good. Kansas State under Chris Kleiman's just going to be good. I went to a school in the Missouri Valley. Chris Kleiman he's just a good coach. Like, look what happens when you hire a coach that can just win football games.
I agree. I think that, Kansas State's going to be a good program for a long time, especially in the new Big 12. I think OU is better than they were last year.
Yeah.
They
have to. They just have to be. Naturally, they have to be.
Yeah. I still have questions about their skill positions. I don't think they have as many playmakers as they need to be a top-tier team, but I think the defense is going to be better. Quarterback, they actually have depth this year with Jackson Arnold, I think. So if Dylan, something does happen to Dylan Gabriel, I think they're in a better situation. OU could make it I picked them to be in the Big 12 championship game just because of how easy their schedule is.
They did get a break.
Yeah.
Schedule. But so going back to Texas, so you're okay with where Sark's at? I mean, there's a lot of Alabama fans rooting for Sark just because of what he's overcome in his life. And then he did a really fantastic job at Alabama. He really did a fantastic job. So there's a lot of people rooting for him. So I don't get to see a lot. I mean, a lot of the Texas fans you see online is just like anger. Why are we losing one possession game? So it's good to hear someone be like, no, it's fine. Now there's things we can improve on, but as we transition into the SEC, which are you excited for that at all? Like,
yeah, I mean, so a little background on me. I'm actually an Oklahoma State undergrad, LSU grad for masters, and then I've done some.
Andrew, you probably don't know this. We follow each other on Twitter, so I knew that.
Oh, okay, yeah. I don't post a ton on my personal page anymore, but I still do some there. But yeah, I'm kind of split fandom here. It's been well documented on the website and everything, or on my Hook 'em Headlines page. But I kind of get the viewpoint there of what it's like for two different coaching regimes within the Big 12. And so I'm actually kind of happy to see Texas branch off and play in the SEC for me personally. But I'm just really excited to have that level of game every single weekend for the Longhorns. I think that having those Texas Georgia or Texas Florida games is going to be a lot more exciting than Texas Baylor, Texas Houston.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where, and this is a long-term where that conversation is 13, 14 years ago from now, where Texas Florida isn't oh my goodness, Texas is playing Florida. It's like, oh, Texas is playing Florida. That's cool.
Guys, we appreciate you being here. You're both definitely welcome to stay, and I appreciate you getting our conversation started. At the same time, I want to respect your time, Andrew. I think you were on a time limit, but you are more than welcome to stay. That's Andrew Miller, everyone. Hook 'em Headlines. You've heard the knowledge, the insight, the information, everything involved. So please check out his work. Hook 'em Headlines is the Twitter handle. Andrew, anything in particular that you're releasing this week that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, I got 2 more pieces coming this week on the site. They're going to be a little bit more intensive. I'm talking about my biggest concerns for Texas going into Alabama, and then also why I think Texas could pull the upset of Alabama. We also got an in-depth preview coming on our YouTube channel tonight.